The Titan core had swallowed civilizations whole. Entire fleets had burned to ash, their wreckage adrift in silent orbits around its perimeter. Some called it an artifact of the precursors, a remnant of a war fought beyond time itself. Others claimed it was alive, an intelligence older than the cosmos, an entity that had judged every species that reached for it unworthy. The legends all agreed on one truth: no one controlled the Titan core, no one harnessed its power, no one survived contact. Yet there it was, locked within the heart of a coalition containment station, its volatile energy writhing against the walls of a confinement field designed by the greatest minds of a dozen species. They watched it, measured it, theorized endlessly about its origins, but no one dared to reach for it, no one except a human. Elias Kade was no hero. He had no battle scars, no grand legacy. He was a xenotech engineer, brilliant, but lost in the sea of bureaucracy that defined scientific progress. He'd spent years developing interface protocols for alien artifacts, only to watch them disappear into vaults, hoarded by politicians and military tacticians who feared what they didn't understand. His work never reached the frontier. He built, and they buried. And so, when Elias was assigned to Titan Research Outpost 09, it felt like another exercise in futility. He had no illusions about what would happen. They would run tests, collect data, and when the results failed to align with preconceived notions, lock the Titan core away again, another mystery condemned to obscurity. His name would be another footnote in a classified file, and the universe would move on. But then the accident happened. The alarms screamed first, shrill and insistent, a sound engineered to bypass thought and trigger immediate action. The containment field flickered, an impossibility, because nothing should have been able to disrupt it. The energy signatures went wild, cascading into frequencies no sensor could interpret. The walls groaned under pressure as something ancient and immeasurable stirred. Scientists scrambled for emergency shutdowns. Engineers barked orders over comms. But it was already too late. The Titan core pulsed, a heartbeat of raw cosmic force, and the room collapsed inward. A violent surge of power exploded outward, sending bodies flying. Electricity arced through the air, searing flesh and metal alike. The stations automated. Systems failed one by one, a cascade of failure reducing the once controlled environment into chaos. And in the center of it all, Elias stood, unharmed. It had called to him. He didn't know how else to describe it. It wasn't words, wasn't thought in any conventional sense, but something deeper, something embedded in the marrow of his bones. The moment he locked eyes with the swirling maelstrom of energy, he understood. The Titan core wasn't just power, it was waiting. His fingers twitched. The air crackled. He could feel it inside him, an impossible connection, a tether between man and machine, between mortal and God. He had spent his life designing interfaces, building connections between species and technologies that were never meant to coexist. And now, standing before the most dangerous object in the known universe, something clicked. There was no fear, only recognition. His hand reached forward, instincts overriding caution, training, reason. The moment his fingertips breached the field, reality shifted. Silence. Complete, infinite, as if sound had never existed. A vastness opened within him, a presence pouring into his mind not as an invasion, but as a union. Images flooded his thoughts, star systems born and consumed, civilizations rising and crumbling in the span of seconds, knowledge that no being should possess. He felt the weight of eons press against him, a tide that should have obliterated him, yet he remained. The core recognized him, and then the world came screaming back. Elias collapsed, gasping as the room erupted in chaos. Scientists shouted, some in horror, others in awe. Security personnel stormed in, weapons drawn, their gazes shifting between Elias and the Titan core, which, for the first time in recorded history, had stilled. No erratic pulses, no bursts of uncontrolled energy. It had bonded to him, and nothing would ever be the same again. Fear gripped the station like an iron vice. The moment Elias collapsed, the research team erupted into chaos. Medics rushed forward, scanners flashing, with urgent readouts. Security personnel, hands shaking over the grips of their weapons, kept their distance, as if expecting him to rise as something other than human. The Titan core remained eerily still. For years, it had been a swirling maelstrom of chaotic energy, lashing out against every attempt to study it. It had refused every species, shattered every barrier, and broken every mind that tried to comprehend it. But now, in the presence of a lone human engineer, it had become calm. Elias gasped, his chest rising with shallow, frantic breaths. Something inside him had changed. He could feel it, not in the way one feels exhaustion or pain, but as an entirely new presence within him. The core wasn't just bonded to him. It had accepted him, and he could hear it. Not words, not thoughts. It was something deeper. Concepts, emotions, raw, unfiltered intent. It whispered not in an alien tongue, but in the language of stars and time. And in the depths of his mind, he understood. The station's lead scientist, a rigid, pragmatic, Uldari named Dr. Zirvel, approached with caution. His 4 silvered eyes flickered over Elias's trembling form. "How are you still alive?" he demanded, voice laced with disbelief. Elias barely managed to lift his head. His body felt different, heavier, but not with fatigue. He could feel the air currents shifting before they moved. The electrical pulses of the station's systems were palpable to him like a second heartbeat. His gaze flickered toward the Titan core. It wasn't just silent, it was waiting. His voice was hoarse. "I don't know." But that was a lie. He did know. The Titan core was aware of him. It had always been seeking something, testing those who approached, judging them by an unfathomable standard. And for some reason, it had deemed him worthy. The realization sent a ripple of unease through the room. Security Chief Varnick, a burly, battle-scarred Kelteran, lifted his rifle, his mandibles clicking in suspicion. "We need to contain him," he growled. "No one has ever made contact with that thing and survived. We don't know what he is anymore." Elias clenched his fists. The instinct to push back flared within him, but it wasn't just his own. The core's presence surged within him. Responding to the threat like a primal defense mechanism, he exhaled, forcing it down. He wasn't some mindless conduit. He was still himself. "I'm not a danger," Elias said, forcing his voice to steady. "But if you think I'm going into a containment cell, you don't understand what just happened." "Doctor," Zirvel studied him, his fingers twitching over his datapad. "Then enlighten us, human." Elias turned his gaze back to the core. A pull echoed in his bones, an unshakable instinct to reach out once more. "It's alive," he said. "Not just a machine, not just a power source. It thinks. It learns." A murmur spread through the assembled crew, some skeptical, others terrified. Dr. Zirvel's expression hardened. "And you claim it has bonded with you? That you can hear it?" Elias nodded. "I don't just hear it, I feel it." Security Chief Varnick didn't lower his weapon. If anything, his grip tightened. "You expect us to believe that this thing, which has rejected every species in the known galaxy, suddenly decided that a human, you, is worthy?" He scoffed. "That doesn't make sense." "It doesn't have to," Elias shot back. "It happened." And then the station shook. A deep, reverberating boom rattled the walls, sending personnel stumbling. Emergency lights flashed red. Sirens screamed through the corridors. Elias's newly heightened senses surged with input. Something else had arrived. The station's comms crackled, filled with static before a chilling message broke through. "This is Coalition Command. Titan Outpost 09. Respond immediately. You have incoming. Unknown fleet, 0 identification matching no known registry. Repeat, you have incoming." Silence fell over the research chamber. Unknown, but Elias knew. He didn't know how, but the core knew, and that knowledge passed through him like fire in his veins. "They're coming for it," he whispered. "They've been searching for it, and now they know. It's awake." The unknown fleet tore through the void like a silent storm. Black hulls swallowed light, their jagged shapes drifting in unnatural formations. No known species flew like this, with neither transponder signals nor recognizable insignia. They weren't here to negotiate. They weren't here to observe. They were here because they had been waiting, watching, for the moment the Titan or awakened, and now they had found it. The station's defense systems roared to life. Automated railguns pivoted, locking onto the incoming threat. Energy shields surged, their electromagnetic fields flickering as combat protocols activated. But the crew of Titan Outpost 09 wasn't built for war. Scientists, researchers, and engineers scrambled for safety as security forces braced for what was coming. Elias felt them before the station's sensors could register them. A sickening pressure, an encroaching force pressing against his mind like a tide trying to breach. Adam. Something was reaching for the core, and through it reaching for him. He gritted his teeth, grounding himself as the presence slithered through the edges of his consciousness. Alien, cold, endless. Then came the whispers. Not words, not thoughts, just hunger. Dr. Zirvel's voice snapped him back. "We need immediate evacuation protocols. If this fleet is hostile..." A detonation tore through the station before he could finish. The impact sent bodies flying, lights flickering. Explosive decompression alarms blared. The docking bay had been hit first, cutting off any escape. Security Chief Varnick pulled himself up from the floor, his heavy frame blocking Elias's view of the carnage beyond. "We're out of time." His mandibles clicked in agitation as he glared at Elias. "If you know something, now would be the time to start talking, human." Elias barely heard him. The Titan core pulsed, its energy curling around him in invisible tendrils reacting to his distress, responding to the presence closing in from outside. He could hear it, not just as a whisper now, but as an urgent command. "Activate me." His breath caught. Activate it? His gaze snapped to the core, still hovering in its containment field, its glow shifting, no longer violent, no longer erratic, but focused. "It's not just a power source," Elias murmured, realization sinking into his bones. "It's a weapon." Dr. Zirvel's expression darkened. "You're suggesting we use something that has wiped out entire civilizations?" Another impact. The station lurched, power failing in sections. The first enemy boarding pod slammed into the station's exterior. "The invaders were coming. We don't have a choice." Elias's voice was different now. Stronger, unshaken. "If we don't act, they'll take it. And if they take it, nothing will stop them." Silence. Then, Varnick lowered his rifle. Dr. Zirvel exhaled, muttering a curse in his native tongue. "You better know what you're doing." Elias wasn't sure if he did, but as he stepped forward, hand outstretched, the Titan core reached back. The instant he made contact, the universe shattered around him. The bonding time ceased to have meaning. Elias's body wasn't a body anymore. He was falling or rising through something endless. Stars collapsed into nothing. Space bent, broke, and reformed in shapes he couldn't comprehend. And in the abyss, something ancient watched him. "You are not the first." The words weren't spoken. They were imprinted into his existence. Elias felt the weight of them, the truth buried in their meaning. Others had come before him, and they had failed. Elias gritted his teeth. "Then why me?" The presence pressed closer, testing, measuring, judging. "Because you do not seek power, you seek purpose." Something snapped into place. The weight of the core poured into him, not crushing, not consuming, but merging. He felt his mind expand, his senses explode outward. He understood. The Titan core had never been just a weapon. It was a guardian, forged to counteract a force older than the stars, a force that now clawed at the station's walls, desperate to claim what it had failed to steal eons ago. The enemy wasn't just another conquering fleet. It was something worse, and it had finally found them. The awakening Elias's body surged back into reality. Every screen on the station blacked out for a full second. Then the core flared, and the station's power grid reversed as if the artifact itself had hijacked the entire system. Varnick stumbled back. What the? Dr. Ziervel's datapad overloaded, readings spiking beyond measurable limits. This is impossible. Elias rose, eyes burning with golden light. He could feel the station as if it were an extension of his body. Every circuit, every failing system, every desperate breath of the people trapped inside, and beyond the walls. Them. Dark, twisted minds slithering through the void, preparing to breach. Not today. Elias raised his hand, and the Titan core answered. The station roared to life. Energy, surging through its failing hull like a phoenix igniting from the ashes. Defense turrets turned, not manually, not by command, but by will. Elias's will. He had become the interface. The fleet outside hesitated. They hadn't expected this. They had expected prey. Instead, they had awakened something they couldn't control. For the first time in their long, devouring existence, they felt something they did not understand. Fear. Elias's lips curled into a snarl. Now, he whispered, his voice no longer entirely human. Let's see if you bleed. The ship tore through the void, engines burning at maximum output. Elias barely had time to steady himself before the Zephyri warships pivoted in pursuit, their sleek, organic hulls pulsing with sickly blue light. They weren't just chasing him. They were hunting him, and they wouldn't stop until the Warhammer was back in their grasp, or he was nothing more than scattered atoms in the abyss. Inside the ship's dimly lit cargo hold, he collapsed against a cold metal wall, the Warhammer, still clutched in his grip, his muscles trembling from the impossible effort of wielding it. The weapon hummed softly, pulsing with an eerie awareness, as if it were more than just metal and energy, something alive. A voice cut through the haze. That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen a human do. Elias turned toward the cockpit, where a woman with dark, piercing eyes and a combat-ravaged flight suit studied him with barely concealed frustration. Captain Leora Vex. Human, like him, but not just any human. The Driftborn. A faction of exiled, humans who had long since abandoned Earth and its weak allegiance to the Zephyri Dominion. They were ghosts, pirates, freedom fighters, outcasts who had chosen defiance over servitude. And now, they were the only reason he was still breathing. Indow, you have any idea what you've just done? Leora snapped, yanking the ship into a brutal dive as a Zephyri warship unleashed a barrage of plasma fire. The hull screamed as the shields flared under the impact. Elias forced himself upright, heart hammering in his chest. You think I planned this? He shot back, his voice ragged. I didn't exactly wake up today thinking, hey, maybe I'll grab a god-killing weapon and piss off the most powerful species in the galaxy, Leora cursed under her breath. You don't get it. It doesn't matter that you didn't plan it. The moment you touched that Warhammer, you stopped being just some scavenger. You became a threat. Another explosion rocked the ship. The Zephyri weren't letting up. Where the hell are we going? Elias demanded. Leora's jaw tightened. The only place left where we might stand a chance. The ship tore through a rift in space, disappearing into a pocket of reality the Zephyri could not follow. The moment the rift closed behind them, the silence was almost suffocating. Elias staggered forward, peering through the viewport. They had emerged in a graveyard of ships, massive, ancient wrecks drifting in eternal slumber. This was no random debris field. This was a boneyard of forgotten wars, battles so old they had been erased from history. Leora spoke without looking at him. This is the sanctuary of the forgotten. A place where the Zephyri's greatest mistakes go to die. If we're lucky, they'll assume you died with them. Elias tightened his grip on the Warhammer. And if we're not lucky? Leora turned to face him. Then we find out what happens when a human wields a weapon that was never meant for them. Hours passed. The ship remained hidden, nestled between the remains of a colossal warship, its surface scorched by ancient battle scars. Leora worked to repair the ship. Damage. But Elias's mind was elsewhere. The Warhammer. He had spent years fighting in wars he barely understood, bleeding for causes that meant nothing to him. And now he held something that had rewritten the balance of the galaxy the moment he touched it. But why? Why had the Warhammer chosen him? He lifted it again, studying the intricate symbols carved into its impossible surface. They shifted, like liquid, reforming every time he blinked. The weight of it was not just physical. It was the weight of history, of destruction, of something far beyond his understanding. Then it spoke. Not in words, not in sound, but in understanding. You were not meant to wield me. And yet, here you stand. The whisper burned through his skull, 1,000 voices overlapping into something incomprehensible. The hammer's pulse synchronized with his heartbeat, each thrum a question, a challenge, a test. Then, memories. Not his own. A war that predated the Zephyri Dominion, a battle between ascended beings, each wielding weapons that could shatter. Reality itself. The Warhammer had been there, had been part of something greater. It had not been forged for destruction. It had been a lock, a seal on something that should never have been woken, and now it was awake. A sudden alarm shattered the silence. Leora cursed, rushing to the cockpit. Elias followed, his pulse spiking as he saw what had triggered the warning. The Zephyri had found them not with ships, not with weapons, but with something else. The darkness of space stirred. A presence pressed against the sanctuary, vast and ancient, coiling through the wreckage like a shadow that had always been there. And then it spoke. Give it back. The words reverberated through the ship, through Elias's mind, through reality itself. Leora paled. They sent an echo. Elias had heard whispers of them, creatures the Zephyri did not speak of, entities that lurked beneath the surface of their godlike empire. They were not warriors. They were enforcers of cosmic law. And if an echo had come for him, it meant the Zephyri had done something they almost never did. They had decided he was too dangerous to live. The ship shook violently. The echo was pulling at it, reality itself warping under its grasp. You are not worthy, it hissed, its presence curling around Elias like a vice. You are an anomaly. You are a mistake. The Warhammer must return to its slumber. Elias could barely breathe. The pressure, the weight of it, it was like standing at the edge of a black hole. But then the Warhammer pulsed, and for the first time, Elias understood. He wasn't just holding the Warhammer. It was holding him, testing him, weighing him. And in that moment he did not falter. He clenched his fist around the handle. I don't care what I was meant to be. I am what I choose to be, the Warhammer answered. A blinding pulse of energy exploded, outward, tearing through the sanctuary, through the wreckage, through the very fabric of space. The echo screamed, its form unraveling as the Warhammer's power rejected its claim, and just like that, it was gone. Elias collapsed, his body shaking, the Warhammer still glowing in his hands. Leora stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then she exhaled. Well, shit. The station became a weapon. Elias was the interface, his mind woven into the Titan Core's ancient mechanisms. He no longer needed to speak, no longer needed to think in the slow, clumsy ways of speech and calculation. The station's failing power grid surged with renewed life, its defenses no longer an assortment of automated turrets and outdated shielding, but an extension of his will. The enemy fleet hesitated. They had never hesitated before. For centuries, maybe millennia, they had been the inevitable. A force that consumed civilizations, erased histories, reduced the universe to silence. They had always been the ones to dictate fate, But now something was staring back at them. A human. They did not understand what had happened. Their sensors failed to define it. Their strategies collapsed before they could form. A mortal species had never done this. No one had ever done this, and the Titan core was no longer theirs to claim. The first ship to break formation died instantly. Elias saw it before it happened, the threads of cause and effect unraveling before him. A single thought, and the station's turrets moved in perfect synchronicity, not firing plasma rounds or explosive payloads, but something far worse. The core reached out, energy tendrils speared through the void, wrapping around the ship's hull, ignoring shields, ignoring armor. The vessel shuddered, its black mass writhing as though it were a living thing. For a second it tried to escape, to pull away, but it was already too late. The core ripped it apart, not in an explosion, not in a way physics could understand. The ship simply ceased to be, crumbling into atoms, its matter dissolving like a whisper lost in the wind. Elias barely had time to register the sensation before the fleet reacted. They struck with everything they had: missiles, kinetic rounds, high-energy beams, weapons that had extinguished planetary civilizations, all focused on the one station that refused to fall, and Elias raised a hand. The Titan core pulsed, and the laws of physics bent. Every impact halted mid-space, their deadly force bleeding away as if the void itself had swallowed them whole. The enemy's greatest weapons became meaningless. Their inevitability was no longer inevitable. Then Elias struck back. The Titan core didn't fire conventional weapons. It didn't need to. It rewrote reality. Space folded around the enemy fleet. Ships that had once been perfectly coordinated found themselves displaced, their formations shattered as the very concept of distance unraveled. Some collided with each other, tearing apart in fiery bursts. Others vanished. Not destroyed, not obliterated, just gone. For the first time, the devourers of worlds became the hunted. Their hive mind, so sure, so unchallenged across the stars, fractured. Fear crept into them, and Elias felt it. He clenched his fists, the core's power surging, ready to end this, to erase them from existence. But then, it spoke to him. No. The Titan core's voice was not sound, not thought. It was truth itself, wrapping around Elias like a commandment older than time. He paused, the fire in his veins flickering. His enemies deserved annihilation. They had brought ruin to thousands of species, had ended more lives than could be counted. He had the power. He could wipe them from the universe like an artist sweeping away a failed sketch. But something deeper surged within the core. A memory. A lesson. It had been built as a guardian, not a destroyer, and Elias was still human. He breathed. The core responded, its energy receding, shifting. It had given him the choice, because that was what made him different. The fleet, now broken, scattered. They ran. For the first time in their existence, they ran. Elias let them go. The core's power dimmed. No longer a storm of wrath, but a beacon pulsing with something greater than destruction, something no other species had ever done. Mercy. Titan. Outpost 09 still stood. The station should have been ruined, its systems inoperable, its crew lost. But instead it thrived. The core's influence had reshaped everything. The energy conduits, the shielding, even the ship's failing infrastructure. It was better than it had ever been. The Coalition's emergency fleet arrived days later, prepared to find wreckage and death. What they found instead was Elias Kade, standing before the Titan core, unchanged but no longer just human. They asked him what happened. He told them the truth, and they feared him, not because he had bonded with the core, but because he had done something no one else had ever done. He had controlled it. And now, the universe would never be the same. The universe held its breath. The Titan core, the single most dangerous artifact in recorded history, had not only been awakened but controlled. And a human had done it. Elias Kade stood at the heart of Titan Outpost 09, His pulse synchronized with something far beyond human comprehension. The station was no longer a battered relic barely holding together. It was reborn, transformed by the core's energy. Its systems hummed with flawless efficiency, its once compromised defenses stronger than ever. But the real transformation was in him. The Coalition's fleet arrived cautiously, their warships lingering at the edge of the outpost's sensor range. Their hesitation was palpable. The emergency response team should have stormed in immediately, seizing control, debriefing survivors, reclaiming what was lost. But they didn't, because Elias Kade was still standing, and he was different. Dr. Ziervel was the first to approach, moving with the stiff precision of someone who wasn't sure whether they were speaking to a man or a force of nature. His eyes darted to the Titan core, now dormant but pulsing gently, not in defiance, not in chaos, but in harmony. "What are you now, Kade?" His voice was softer than before, not demanding, not calculating, curious, wary. Elias took a slow breath. He could feel the station, its circuits, its energy, its structure, like extensions of his own limbs. But he was still himself. The core had not consumed him, had not erased him. It had accepted him. "Still human," he said, and it was the truth. Dr. Ziervel exhaled, shoulders dropping slightly. "Then explain how you did what no species has ever done." Elias looked past him, past the gathered officers, past the Coalition, fleet waiting in silence. What could he tell them? That he had heard the core's voice? That it had judged him worthy? That he had wielded power beyond comprehension and had chosen mercy over annihilation? No. They wouldn't understand. They weren't ready to understand. Instead, he met Ziervel's gaze and said, "I listened." It wasn't a lie. The debriefings were endless. Elias sat through weeks of interrogations, admirals, scientists, intelligence officers, all trying to dissect what had happened. Every conversation felt like walking on a knife's edge. Some wanted to contain him. If he could bond with the core, what stopped him from becoming a threat? Others wanted to weaponize him. If he could control it, why not turn it into the greatest military asset in galactic history? But no one could undo what had happened. The footage didn't lie. The enemy fleet had run. The Titan core had accepted him. The impossible had been rewritten, and Elias Kade was at the center of it all, yet he refused their demands. "I won't be your weapon," he told them, and the core pulsed in agreement. The whispers never truly stopped. Even after the Coalition declared him unclassified but unrestricted, even after they decided to watch him but not imprison him, the whispers remained. Not from the core, from the void. Something out there had felt what he had done. Something older than the core itself. And it was watching. He felt it in his dreams, in the cold silence between stars. A question unspoken, waiting for an answer. Elias stood at the station's viewport, staring into the vast unknown. The Titan core hovered nearby, its glow faint but constant. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. The stars were silent. Elias Kade stood at the observation deck of Titan Outpost 09, staring into the endless black beyond. The Titan core pulsed softly behind him, its glow rhythmic. Not chaotic, not violent, but alive. The station was whole again. The enemy had fled. The Coalition had retreated to its bureaucratic debates, uncertain of what to do with him. But the universe had changed. He felt it. The core had made him more than human, not in the sense of strength or intelligence, but in perception. He could sense the subtle ripples in space, disturbances that had not been there before, like echoes of something waking up. Something had taken notice, and it was coming. Dr. Ziervel stood beside him, his 4 silver eyes reflecting the Titan core's glow. "The Coalition will never let you walk free," he said. "Not truly." Elias smirked. "Then let them try to stop me." The Uldari scientist didn't respond at first. He had spent his life fearing the Titan core, fearing what lay beyond the known. But Elias had touched the unknown, and instead of fear, he had come back with understanding, or something close to it. Chervel exhaled slowly. "Where will you go?" Elias's gaze lingered on the distant void. The whispers were there at the edges of his mind. Faint, but insistent. A presence that hadn't been there before. He had done what no one else had. He had controlled the core. He had chosen mercy over destruction, and now something wanted to know why. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I think I need to find out." Chervel gave a slow nod. "Then I hope, for all our sakes, you're ready for whatever finds you first." Elias turned back to the Titan core, feeling its energy pulse in time with his heartbeat. Somewhere out there beyond the furthest reaches of known space, something was waiting, watching. The Titan core was never the end of the story. It was only the beginning.